So welcome back everybody to today's instalment of very rich fruit cake making, and we have done part 1, preparing the fruit, part 2A, lining the tin, 2B, making the cake and cooking it. Part 3 was feeding the cake and getting preparations underway so that you've got all the stocks and supplies in that you need, including the boards. And today we're doing part 4, which is marzipanning. And I have to admit, this is my favourite part of the process. So here I've got my block of marzipan. And you can see that it's 454 grams, an old-fashioned pound of marzipan. I'm using the golden marzipan today. And don't forget what we said last time, which was you need to measure, weigh your cake. And if you remember, my cake was a shade under 800 grams. Here it is. Been fed once or twice now, so there's enough alcohol in there to sort of give it some nice kick and a nice body and a little bit of extra preservative. And you take the weight of the cake, 800 grams in my case. It's a nice small cake, and half of that is what you need to bring in marzipan. So I've got just over half. And just one block will be enough to marzipan top and the sides. So you obviously don't need to marzipan the bottom of the cake. Okay, there are two ways about doing this. One is you could take your block of marzipan and obviously make it nice and malleable, and I'll explain how I'm going to make that malleable in a minute, and roll the whole thing out and then lift it over and just ease it all over the cake. You can do it that way if you're comfortable. This is a way that I've done in the past, so I thought I'd share this with you so that you've got some little tips and techniques and tricks. And I've got some icing sugar in a sieve here, which I'm going to put on top of some grease-proof paper. Okay, and this you'll see later how this makes life a lot easier. But for my marzipan, that's the whole lot that I'm going to need. I'm going to break it in half, and I'm going to take the bigger half to do the top. Okay, the rest of it is actually going to make the edging that goes on the outside of the four sides of the cake, and I'll put that to one side. And this bigger half I'm actually going to put into the microwave for 30 seconds. I use technology to help as much as possible because it takes the hard work out of things for me. But you have to be careful when you're using a microwave that you don't create hot spots within the marzipan or icing. What I've previously done is I've taken some apricot jam out of my jar, just couple of tablespoons. And again, I've put that into the microwave for 30 seconds just to soften it so that it's runny. That's the glue that I'm going to use to stick it to my cake with. So now that I've warmed it up, literally you heard that going there. This is lovely and warm now, but be careful when you're sort of smashing it and making it into one nice malleable lump. You might come across hot spots, and you need to make sure that you don't burn yourself. So try and incorporate the warmer areas that the microwave has created into the extremities that aren't quite so hot. And what I'm doing now is I'm literally making it really nice and seamless, so that that's a lovely warm and soft ball of dough that is going to be very easy to roll out. Okay, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm literally just making it into one sort of shape without any lines in it, nice and soft. It's lovely and warm on a cold day. This is lovely to hold in your hands. And literally now I'm going to put it onto my icing sugar. And I need to go and get myself a rolling pin because I haven't got one. There we are. And you've got a few minutes before it actually starts to reset and re-solidify. So I'm going to take some of my excess icing sugar like so. And let's just make sure that you can see this. There we are. That's better. All right, so now I'm going to roll my marzipan out like so. So it's a nice uniform sort of thickness all the way over. And because I've got square cakes, of course, turning it around is dead easy when you've got it on greaseproof. And I'm just going to roll it out so that it's at least the size of the square cake that I'm going to put into the middle of it. And here is my cake that obviously I wrapped up in greaseproof last time. So I'm going to take it out of the greaseproof now. It's a lovely quarter of the cake. Okay, and this is the bit that I've learnt to do over the years. So you can see here that the cake is considerably smaller than the bigger half of the marzipan I've rolled out now. But it's a nice uniform sort of thickness. I haven't got anywhere that's too much thicker than anywhere else. It's a nice thickness. And I'm going to take my glue, and unlike most recipe books that say cover the cake with the glue, I'm actually covering the marzipan, which makes life a lot easier. And I'm covering all of it, well, practically all of it, with just a fine layer of glue, or apricot jam as we know it, like so. And I'm going to take the cake, and if you remember from last time, I said don't try and cut the top off, no matter how uneven it is. I'm going to turn it onto that uneven top of the cake. I'm going to put that top on top of the marzipan and centralize it. There we go. Make it nice and sort of flat. Push it in a little bit so that it adheres to the marzipan like so. And then this is the clever bit. Push the marzipan into, if I can show you that like that, into those gaps. If you need to rob Peter to pay Paul, as they say, and put some under the corners so that it shores it up, and push the marzipan into the gaps around the edges, what you've got happening, and you can turn this round. This is why I do it on greaseproof, because it's so much easier to do it this way. And literally push the excess marzipan into those corners where it's lower down on the cake, and it's actually filling the corners with the marzipan. So what you're doing is you're pushing the marzipan into the gaps, and because there's the glue, the apricot jam on it, it's literally just filling those gaps. Now don't forget to bob down and get level with the top of the cake so that you can check that the cake is not uneven, so that it's you know, you've got the marzipan going evenly into those corners and you haven't got a lopsided cake at the end of it. And having done that and pushed it in so that the glue makes contact with the cake, you can see that quite nicely there. I'm pushing it in like so, and I'm now just going to get down and make sure, yes, that's level, that's lovely. If I had a spirit level, I could actually put it across and check that it's not sort of lower on one side. And I have to say, that's now filled all of the gaps in the corners and around the edges where the top of the cake may have been a bit uneven. And this is why we say start with the larger of the two halves, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my knife and very carefully I'm going to cut the excess off, knowing that you've actually got, if I can show you that, you've actually got those edges, or the bottom of that cake, which is going to be the top of the cake. Okay, you've got them well filled. And these extra bits, of course, can be added to the other smaller half. There we go. And can bolster the thickness. There we are. So the role of the marzipan is literally to form a barrier between the cake and the icing so that you don't have any of the darkness of the cake coming through into the icing. It's also delicious, isn't it? Full of nuts, obviously almond nuts. So there we are. So now we've got our lovely marzipan topped cake. When you turn it over, if you've got any bits like that, where it has in fact missed it, don't worry, because you've got plenty of excess, and because it's nice and soft still, you can get some excess. And just if you need to do any patching on the top or in the corners, don't forget to glue. Just a little tiny bit of glue will help it to stick. This is the layer that isn't going to show. Okay. However, there we are. And the better you do the marzipan, the better, if you are doing fondant icing, the better the result for the fondant icing. If you're doing just ordinary good old-fashioned royal icing, because you're doing just a snow scene, it doesn't matter so much, because obviously that is much more liquid and malleable and can go into any of these little gaps and holes. But if you're fondant icing, which I will do next time, then you really need to get your marzipan layer right. So there we are. So we've got our marzipan top on it. So I'm literally going to move that back out of the way for now. And what I'm going to do is make sure that you haven't got any sort of cake crumbs anywhere. And if you see any on the marzipan, pinch them off, because we don't really want them in the marzipan. And I'm going to take those bits of marzipan and icing, and again, I'm going to literally push them up into a nice ball. And don't forget, we've got the other half of the marzipan. So I'm going to put that together now, and I'm going to put that into the microwave just for 20 or 30 seconds to get that nice and malleable. There we go. Now, in the meantime, okay, I could put the that part of the cake or that cake onto an icing board if I wanted to. Don't forget, at this point, after you've done the marzipaning, you need to let it dry for a week so that it hardens. The marzipan will lose a little bit of its moisture, and then it will be nice and sort of solid, so that you've got a nice solid, not rock hard, but you'll have a much more solid base on which to put your icing. So here we go. So that's literally had 20 seconds. Don't forget to watch out for the hot spots. If you see any bits of cake that have been left in the marzipan from the previous point, then just pinch it out. And what I'm going to do is it is quite hot in places, and that was only after 30 seconds. So just make sure all of that lovely heat is distributed evenly throughout. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to roll this marzipan half out into a sausage on top of this, so that I've got it as long as the exterior perimeter of the cake. So I'm literally like a sausage. I'm rolling it out onto the icing sugar, which is on the greaseproof paper. And I find the greaseproof paper just makes things much easier to maneuver. Okay, like so. I'm going to take it round and see if it stretches around the cake. Not quite. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit more. There we are. And now with my rolling pin, I'm going to flatten it and literally just flatten roll. And what you want is the height of the cake, which in my case is that sort of about 5 centimeters deep. And that's what we want to do now. We want to actually roll this sleeve, if you like, of marzipan out. And as we roll it, okay, make sure it's nice and even. If it starts to become misshapen, just stop, and using the edge of your fingers or your hands just get it back into a rectangular shape. Okay, so we've got it. That's the right length, but what I'm going to do now is exactly what I've just said. I'm literally going to just push it back into place so that it's a good rectangle, and try and make the ends rectangular as well so that they butt up against each other in a nice sort of sharp corner. So there we are, there's the sleeve, like so. And I'm just going to, just on the other end, like so, I'm just literally squaring that off as well. So we've got a nice square end. Okay. And then maybe give it one final, now that it's a uniform sort of sleeve like so, I can literally just flatten it to make sure that it is the same width and height. And if you need to measure it, let's get my knife and just measure where it's going up to. You're measuring up to the top, of the very top of the cake, so that's easily deep enough. And again, like we did before, we're going to use the glue and actually slick the glue on the marzipan rather than doing it on the cake, because otherwise you'll get bits of cake everywhere. And sometimes you can rip the cake when you're gluing with your jam because it is sticky, and then you're ending up in a massive mess, whereas I find this much cleaner and easier to do. Don't forget, I've got 4 of these to do. There we go. So, and I'm going to put a little slick at the edges as well so that they butt up against each other. And what we do now is we get the cake, whether it's going to stay in a packet or whether it's going to go onto your silver board at this point, it doesn't matter. And I'm literally going to pick the sleeve up and push it down like so. So make sure it's touching the edges of the cake. Make sure that you can press it down like so. Some people prefer to do the edges first and then do the whole cake, put the top on the whole cake, and that's fine if you prefer to do it that way around. You'll find your own way of doing it. As I said earlier, right at the beginning, some people just like to roll the whole thing out and just roll it over the rolling pin and literally drop it over. I'm going to stretch it. Look at that. That's a perfect amount. Good. And literally you then make sure you press the marzipan up against the sides of the cake and flatten it and make sure that that join is complete as well. And you can overlap it. If you take your fingers and just literally just use your fingers to mold it and press it into the side of the cake like so. The more time you spend on getting the marzipanning right and looking, you know, lovely, if you want really square, sharp corners, spend some time really sort of molding those corners into a point, if that's what you're looking for, if that's the thing you're looking for. That's joined quite nicely there, so that's not going to come open. And you've now basically sealed your cake in marzipan. So I'm just literally going to spend some time getting that nicely welded, pushed into the cake. And I can cover my hands with some icing sugar and literally flatten the top, making sure if you want to put a little bit of icing on the top like so, and then literally smoothing it so that you've got a really nice crisp tight finish on the marzipan, and then it's level at the top, level all the way around, pushed in at the sides, and then I can use a brush to literally dust all of those bits off. So that now, guys, either needs to go onto your silver cake board and cover it with some greaseproof so that nothing can splash onto it or get into it. And that should be left for a week. You could put it into an airtight tin. You could just wrap it up in greaseproof and keep it in the cupboard. Okay, if you haven't got your board ready at this point. There we are. So that's all ready to go away for a week. No more feeding, obviously, now. Just let it dry and get a little bit harder before you start icing. So next time it will be how to fondant ice and how to royal ice once you've marzipanned. Bye for now.